Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today's episode is going to be a $50 deck tech. When I say $50, I mean that is an overall deck cost. Both shipping and commanders that are $10 or less are going to be included in that cost, but basic lands will not be. Decks on this channel are built to be fun, inexpensive, and focused. If you want to learn more about what a focused commander deck is, check out this video here. On this deck tech, I'm going to take you through its strategy, the tactics, and how this deck wins. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And while you're at it, subscribe and review our podcast as well. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCGplayer affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Today's deck tech comes to you courtesy of SETH. SETH has been supporting this channel for over a year now as a general tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without amazing patrons like SETH. For the personalized deck tech, SETH chose Surrak Dragonclaw with a focus on group buffs. Surrak is a 6/6 human warrior with flash that costs 2 green, blue, red. He can't be countered, and creature spells you control can't be countered. He also gives other creatures you control trample. So Surrak basically is already a group buff, protecting your creatures and also getting them through. But there are plenty of other good buffs in Teamers, so we're going to make our army even deadlier. So our strategy is pretty simple. We're going to get some creatures out, and we're going to cast group buffs for our army. So with this deck, we're going to build up our board and build up our creatures as well. And then how we win with this deck is pretty straightforward. We're going to run over our opponents with our unstoppable horde. At a certain point, even our weakest of creatures can be extremely deadly. As with all Commander's Quarters decks, I'm going to take you through 10 different tactics that show you how the deck works and how we're going to win with it. So let's start things off with tactic number 1, Into the Wild. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 and tap and sacrifice to get a basic land into play tapped. Next up, there's Farseek, which can get us a mountain or an island into play tapped. And then Rampant Growth and Secure Tribe-Elder can get us any basic into play tapped. Next up, there's Coiling Oracle, which when it comes into play, we reveal the top card of our library. If it's a land, it goes onto the battlefield, otherwise it goes into our hand. And then when Springbloom Druid comes into play, we sacrifice a land and we get 2 basics into play tapped. And then Grow from the Ashes is going to get us 1 basic into play untapped or 2 if we kicked it. And finally, there's Cultivate, which gets us 1 basic into our hand and 1 into play tapped. Now these are some fantastic ramp spells, but we're not quite done with ramping just yet. So now let's move on to tactic number 2, Dork Army. First up, we've got Elvish Mystic and Land of War Elves. Both are fantastic turn 1 plays and both tap for a green. Next up, there's Channeler Initiate, which when it comes into play, we put 3 -1/-1 counters on target creature we control, and then we can tap it to remove a -1/-1 counter from it to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. And then Radiclaw Mystic can tap for any of our colors, and if we turn it face up, it adds each of our colors to our mana pool. Next up, we've got 3 mana dorks that tap for 1 but can tap for more with Leafkin Druid, Whisper of the Wilds, and Elysian Caryatid. Leafkin Druid taps for green, but if we control 4 or more creatures, it taps for green instead. And then Whisper of the Wilds can tap for green if we control a creature with power 4 or greater. And Elysian Caryatid does the same, but for any color. But after we've ramped, it's time for us to start getting buffs ready for our army. So now let's move on to tactic number 3, Get Pumped. First up, there's Side of the Scale Lords, which says at the beginning of combat on your turn, creatures you control with toughness 4 or greater get +2/+2 and gain vigilance until end of turn. The majority of our creatures meet that requirement, so they're going to get bigger on attacks and also be able to stay back to block. And then Berserker's Onslaught makes our attacks doubly as effective because it gives our attacking creatures double strike. But perhaps Bow of Nightly is even more effective because it gives our attacking creatures we control Death Touch. Because our commander gives our creatures trample, this lets us get a ton of damage through. On top of that, Bow of Nightly is just a good piece of utility because it has pay 1 and a green and tap it to choose 1. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Bow of Nightly deals 2 damage to target creature with flying, you gain 3 life, or put up to 4 target cards from your graveyard on the bottom of your library in any order. Next up, there's Goblin War Drums, which says creatures you control have menace. Gruul War Chant is very similar, but it gives our attacking creatures we control +1/+0 and menace. And then Standard Fall says at the beginning of combat on your turn, for each defending player, separate all creatures that player controls into 2 piles and that player chooses 1. Only creatures in the chosen piles can block this turn. Each of these are fantastic ways at making our opponents have a much harder time blocking. And then we've got Fires of Yavimaya, which gives creatures we control haste. Being able to attack with our creatures right away is huge. So we're also running Rhythm of the Wild, which says creature spells you control can't be countered, non-token creatures you control have Riot. So when they come into play, we can either give them a +1/+1 counter or haste. Now, as good as all these team buffs are, they're still not quite as good as the Golden Pig. And the Golden Pig is going to be the number 1 card out of our 99. The Golden Pig for this deck is Teamer Ascendancy. It's an enchantment that costs green, blue, red. It says creatures you control have haste. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. So this not only speeds up our creatures, but it also is a value engine for us throughout the game. When we cast a big creature, not only can we swing with them right away, but we get a card to replace them. The amount of value that this can provide us throughout the game is incredible, and that's why it's the Golden Pig. But we're nowhere near done with our team buffs just yet. So now let's move on to tactic number 4, Teamwork. First up, we've got Surrak the Huntcaller, which has Formidable. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater, target creature you control gains haste until end of turn. And then Ogre Battle Driver has, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, that creature gets +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. Again, the faster that we can swing with our creatures in this deck, the better. Next up is Aggressive Mammoth, which is an 8/8 with Trample and gives all of our other creatures Trample. So if our commander ever dies, we can still have Trample for our army. And then Archetype of Imagination has creatures you control have flying, and creatures your opponents control lose flying and can't have or gain flying. So outside of creatures with reach, our opponents won't be able to block our creatures. And then Shaman of the Great Hunt is a fantastic creature for this deck as well. It says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And it also has Ferocious, 2 Simic, draw a card for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. So this buffs our creatures every single time they hit a player, and on top of that, it's a value engine for card draw. Up next, we've got Thrix the Sudden Storm, which has Flash, Flying, and spells you cast with converted mana cost 5 or greater cost 1 less to cast and can't be countered. A lot of our creatures fit that requirement, so it's a great way to reduce their costs and to protect them too. And then there's Grand Warlord Rada, which has haste, and whenever one or more creatures you control attack, add that much mana in any combination of red and or green. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. So the more creatures that we attack with, the more mana that we get, and the more creatures that we can cast in that turn. And finally, there's Aetherwind Basker, which is a huge beater for this deck. It's a 7/7 with Trample, but when it comes into play or attacks, we get energy for each creature that we control. And at any point, we can pay energy and give Aetherwind Basker +1/+1 until end of turn. So the more creatures that we have in play, the deadlier this gets. But we've also got some ways to make the rest of our army even deadlier too. So let's go over those ways now in tactic number 5, Crash Through. First up, there's Cultivator Blades, which can pump our army by 3 when it attacks. And then when Decimator Provinces comes into play, creatures we control get +2/+2 and gain Trample until end of turn. Enrace Forerunner takes that a step further by giving other creatures we control +2/+2, Vigilance, and Trample until end of turn. Outside of creatures though, we've got some fantastic ways to pump our army with Overwhelming Stampede and Dragon Throne of Tarkir. Overwhelming Stampede says, until end of turn, creatures you control gain Trample and get +X/+X for X is the greatest power among creatures you control. And then Dragon Throne of Tarkir is essentially a repeatable version of this that's equipped to a creature that we control. It says equip creature as Defender and pay 2 and tap it. Other creatures you control gain Trample and get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is this creature's power. We have a ton of powerful creatures in this deck, and both these are great ways to utilize their power. But how are we going to get to all these great cards? Let's go through some ways now in tactic number 6, Digging Down. First up, there's Colossal Majesty, which says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. And then we've got Collective Unconscious and Shamanic Revelation, both of which are going to draw us a card for each creature that we control. On top of that, Shamanic Revelation is going to gain us 4 life for each creature we control with power 4 or greater. In this deck, we've got plenty of creatures that meet that requirement. Next up, there's Beast Whisperer, which says whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. Soul of the Harvest is very similar. It says whenever another non-token creature you control enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. Both of these can provide us an incredible amount of value throughout the game. And then Ulvenwald Observer is kind of the opposite of these. It has whenever a creature you control with toughness 4 or greater dies, draw a card. So this gives us some good replacement value when one of our creatures dies. Next up, there's Keeper of the Keys, which when it comes into play, we become the Monarch, and at the beginning of our upkeep, if we're the Monarch, creatures we control can't be blocked this turn. So this can provide us card advantage as well as a way to get all of our creatures through. And then Keeper of Fable says whenever one or more non-human creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. Binding of Thassa takes that a step further, and it says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. On top of that, we can pay 1 in a blue and tap it, and creatures our opponents control attack this turn of Fable. So this provides us great card advantage on top of being able to force attacks. Next up, there's Factor Fiction, which says reveal the top 5 cards of your library, and opponent separates those into 2 piles, put 1 pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. Rush of Knowledge is another great draw spell in this deck. It says draw cards equal to the highest converted mana cost among permanents you control. So if our commander's in play, at the very least, we're going to get 5 cards. And finally, there's Return of the Wild Speaker, which is a fantastic and flexible card in this deck. It says choose 1, draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. So this can be a great way to draw a ton of cards or a fantastic combat trick. But once we're set up and drawing cards, how do we protect our team? Let's go through some ways now in tactic number 7, Staying Alive. First up, there's Rapid Vigor, which says regenerate each creature you control. 2 mana to protect our entire team is a fantastic deal. And then there's Archetype of Endurance, which says creatures you control have hexproof, and creatures your opponents control lose hexproof and can't have or gain hexproof. So this not only protects our team, but it can also make our opponents' creatures weaker too. But outside of these, we've got some other ways to protect our things too. So now let's move on to tactic number 8, Nope Rope. First up, we've got Mystic Snake and Frilled Mystic, which do the exact same thing. They have flash, and when they come into play, we counter target spell. Counter spell on a creature is a very good thing for this deck. And then we've got Negate, which says counter target non-creature spell. Even though it's not a creature, it's obviously still a fantastic spell. Now, counter spells are great, but how do we deal with things that are already in play? It's time for us to move on to tactic number 9, hit him back. First up, there's Gruul Rage Beast, which whenever it or another creature enters the battlefield under our control, that creature fights target creature an opponent controls. And then there's Thorn Mammoth, which does the fighting for us. It says whenever it or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Thorn Mammoth fights up to one target creature you don't control. An Angler Turtle makes the creatures come to us. It has Hexproof, and creatures your opponents control attack each combat if able. This is a great way to force our opponents into some really bad attacks. Next up, there's Reclamation Sage, which when it comes into play, we destroy target artifact or enchantment. Acidic Slime takes that a step further, destroying target artifact, enchantment, or land. And then when Terastodon comes into play, we can destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents. For each permanent put into a graveyard this way, its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature token. That's an exchange we'll make any day of the week. But outside of destroying our opponent's things, we've also got another use for them too. So now let's move on to our final tactic, tactic number 10, join the team. First up, there's Surrak Dragonclaw, which has, at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may pay 1 Is It. If you do, gain control of target creature and opponent controls with power less than you summon Dragonclaw's power until end of turn, untap that creature and it gains haste until end of turn. And then when Molten Primordial enters the battlefield, for each opponent, gain control of up to 1 target creature that player controls until end of turn, untap those creatures that gain haste until end of turn. Stealing our opponent's creatures, buffing them with our buffs, and smacking them in the face with their own creatures is a fantastic feeling. And Mob Rule lets us do that in a big way. It says choose 1, gain control of all creatures with power 4 greater until end of turn, untap those creatures that gain haste until end of turn, or gain control of all creatures with power 3 or less until end of turn, untap those creatures that gain haste until end of turn. This lets us steal a ton of creatures at once and smack all of our opponents with their own creatures. Again, a huge thanks to Seth for picking this commander. I had a fantastic time building this deck. If you want to support this channel or want your own deck dedicated to you, consider becoming a patron. But now that we've gone through the spells in this deck, let's go on to the mana base. First up, there's Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which we can tap and sacrifice to get a basic land into play tapped. Next up, we've got 4 lands that come into play tapped and tap for either a red or green mana. And then we've got 3 lands that come into play and tap for either a blue or red mana. Next up, we've got 2 lands that come into play tapped and tap for either a green or blue mana. And then Frontier Bivouac comes into play tapped and can tap for any of our colors. Finally, we're running 24 basic lands. 16 of those are going to be a forest, 4 will be an island, and 4 will be a mountain. And now that we've gone through every single card in this deck, let's do a quick price check. A quick reminder that our deck costs are calculated using TCGplayer optimization, optimizing with even heavily played and damaged cards because those cards need a home too. The average Surrak Dragonclaw EDH rec deck is going to set you back $206.26. Our deck is going to be much more affordable, coming in at $49.82. Again, the price of this deck is the price that I got for it on the day that I'm recording. If you want to see a breakdown of this deck's cost, check out the link in the description. Keep in mind that prices can and will fluctuate and change over time. But with these deck costs, I want to be as transparent as I possibly can. Again, Commander's Quarters decks are about to be tuned and focused within their budget, but there are always ways that we can improve on them. So let's go through some reasonable upgrades now to see what some of those ways just might be. First up, let's add in Pathbreaker Ibex by taking out Molten Primordial. Next up, let's add in Overrun Frostfang by taking out Surrak Dragonclaw. And then let's add in Rishkar's Expertise by taking out Collective Unconscious. Next up, let's add in Beastmaster Ascension by taking out Mob Rule. And then let's add in Goreclaw by taking out Rattleclaw Mystic. And finally, let's add in Thunderfoot Baloth by taking out Cultivator of Blades. And now it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what you think about this deck and what you think about the commander in general. And make sure you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons who help make this show possible. I truly couldn't do any of this without your support. If you want to support this channel directly, consider becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There are even tiers where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. You can check out all the Patreon tiers and rewards at patreon.com/commandersquarters. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.